Hey everyone, welcome to Future Ready Leadership. My guest today, Rich Diviney, former Navy SEAL, best-selling author of The Attributes, 25 Hidden Drivers of Optimal Performance. I have a copy of the book right here, and it's signed, so I feel special. Where is it? There we go. I can hold it up to the camera there. Rich, thank you so much for joining me.
Well, Jacob, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So as I mentioned before we hit record, you're the third or the fourth Navy SEAL that I've had on this show. So we've had quite a few quite a few SEALs. Why don't we first jump in with a little bit of background information about you? So we can go as far back as you want, anything that you think is relevant. I certainly want to talk about your time as a Navy SEAL and how you got into writing this book on these 25 attributes.
Absolutely. I would say that I grew up wanting to be a Navy pilot. I grew up in Connecticut. I have a twin brother. We both wanted to be Navy jet pilots, and that was kind of where we were bent on. And it was probably high school. So it was 90, I think 91, after the first Gulf War, where I saw an article that kind of outlined special forces in Navy, Army, Air Force, and the Marines, and it had a bunch of stuff on Navy SEALs. I was like, who the heck are these guys? And I began to look into them, and I said, well, these guys are pretty cool. They seem to do everything, sea, air, land, and then they were kind of waterborne, and I love everything about ocean and swimming, and I'm a fish, so I just love that idea. I ended up at Purdue University, but my brother and I was in an ROTC program, and ultimately, when it came down to commission, I did not want to wonder if I could be a Navy SEAL. So I just tried out, and luckily went to training, and unfortunately made it through training, which is also a tough go. But yeah, I got commissioned in '96. Things were kind of slow until 2001. And then the world got very kinetic, and our lives got very busy. But I ended up staying in for about 21 years. I retired in 2017. I was an officer, so I led teams. I was a commanding officer of a team. I also was in charge of selection and assessment for SEAL Team 6, which is one of the elite teams that no one knew about until we got bin Laden. But it was during that time frame where I really began to kind of dive into and deconstruct high performing teams, and what were those things that allowed us to do what we did, and found that when I came out of that kind of research, that these weren't SEAL things, these were human things.
Yeah.
And so coming out in the leadership space, working with my buddy Simon Sinek, who I know you are aware of, began to work in the leadership space, but realized I could probably write a book about performance in teams, which is what I did.
Very cool. Let's talk about your time as a SEAL for a little bit. Are there any, I mean, I'm sure there's many, but if you had to pick maybe your top 1 to 3 stories or experiences that you think most shaped who you are as a leader and as a person, any particular stories or situations or experiences come to mind for you?
Yeah, I would say there's probably many, and I probably can't remember all of them. I would say the first one that comes to mind is really just when I first graduated SEAL training. So for the audience, I mean, you've had a few SEALs on the program, so the audience is probably aware of SEAL training. It's BUDS, Basic Underwater Demolition SEAL training, down in San Diego, California, down in your
Can you go over
neck of the woods.
how intense that is for people who are not familiar with it?
Yeah, well, it's 90% attrition rate at BUD. So 90% of the guys who go through it don't make it through. Or to start don't make it through. It's 6 months long, and it's 3 phases. It's very intense. The first phase is all kind of kick your butt phase, and again, those of you who are in Southern California know that the water out there is not tropical at all. It's actually cold, right? And so even though it's very physically demanding, most people quit SEAL training because of the cold. It's not actually because of the physical stuff, because you can only do so many push-ups before you can't do anymore. But I think coming out of that training, so my class started with 170 people.
Wow.
And we graduated 38 people, and I remember graduating. I remember graduation day, looking around me and asking myself, how the heck am I still here? And it was what I refer to as my first taste of what I refer to as healthy imposter syndrome. And what I mean by that is I kind of said to myself, okay, well, I know I'm supposed to be here, but these people seem so much better than me that I'm just going to make sure that I'm always upping my game. I'm always doing as much as I possibly can so I don't let down the folks around me. And I think that was a lesson I carried throughout my whole career. And I always looked at those around me, and I was always just in awe of what they could do and what they were doing. And I know it was not in a in a way that I felt I diminished my own contribution, but I certainly used what I was seeing as motivation and desire to always step up my game and always do better. And I think that was one of the main lessons that I learned right at the beginning, and I carried through my whole career.
Have you been in a lot of combat situations as a SEAL?
Well, yeah, I mean, we did. I mean, I several hundred combat missions in Iraq and Afghanistan, and
Oh,
so
wow.
now what I think what people don't know in the civilian world don't understand is it's not like the TV and movies. It's not like every time you go out
You're
there's
not
a
walking in there with
gunfight.
like a machine gun and just like explosions and
No,
kicking
no,
down the
yeah.
doors.
And in fact, I think you always endeavored for your missions to get done without having to shoot your gun. If you could go in and get your guy, and no bullets, no blood, that was always the best case scenario. It wasn't always the scenario, but it certainly was the best case. And so the combat missions are much more about the preparation, the planning, the execution in a way that helps you accomplish the mission at minimal cost of life and limb. And I would say that another misconception is that people think that the best way the best way through a fight or the best way in a fight is to be able to win that fight, and that's not untrue. But our philosophy was the best way to win a fight is to avoid the fight altogether. If you can, right? If you can avoid getting into a fight and just get the mission done, that's the best
Yeah.
case. Again, not always the case, but if
Have
you
you
can do it,
been?
that's all.
Were you in several like near death situations? Have you been shot? Did you have to go through all that traumatic experience?
No, never been shot. But I think the near death experience is interesting. You never think of these experiences as near death when you're in them. I think
Yeah.
it's afterwards that you say to yourself, "Man, that was." When I think back, that was a close one. But I have to say, when you're with a unit like that, the confidence level, and I say confidence very specifically because it's not an arrogance; it's a confidence that you are with people that if something happens, you will be able to handle it. And so I would say I never in all those times ever felt in a position where I felt like I was out of control or didn't feel like we had what we needed to address whatever situation we were in. We were well equipped, well trained, we were well prepared, and even though things sometimes got gnarly, it was handleable. So.
Yeah. And I guess that's where this idea of the attributes, I mean, is that where the concept of the book attributes came from? Is from those situations, being prepared, knowing you were trained, having the right team, having the right mindsets?
Yeah, I would say yes and no. I think one of the things that we have to realize about performance, and this is what I had to kind of deconstruct, is that performance is bifurcated between these two things. There's skills and there's attributes. And skills are those things that you train to do, and they're doing the thing. They're shooting the
Yeah.
gun. They're driving the car. They're throwing the ball. Right. You're trained to do those things. You're taught to do those things. However, skills don't tell you how you're going to operate in stress, challenge, and uncertainty, because in an unknown environment, it's very difficult, if not impossible, to apply a known skill. And this is when we lean on these attributes. Attributes they're inherent to us. They're qualities. They're like adaptability, patience, situational awareness. And so what I recognized about the SEAL world is that when you're training to become a SEAL, it's not about learning the skill. It's about whether or not you have the attributes. A great example was given to me by an older guy, an older SEAL, who said, he told a story of a kid showing up one day at SEAL training, and he walked into the instructor's offices and said, "I want to be a Navy SEAL." And the instructor said, "Okay, fine, you got to do a swim test." And the kid said, "Fine." So they go out to the pool. Easy test. It's 50 meters, 25 meters to one end, 25 meters back to the other end. Anyway, the kid gets all ready to go, and he jumps in the pool. And as soon as he jumps in the pool, he sinks to the bottom of the pool. And he starts walking across the bottom of the pool to one end, and he touches the one end, and he walks across the bottom of the pool back to the other end. He comes up. He's gasping for air. The instructor looks at him and says, "What the hell are you doing?" And the kid looks at the instructor, still trying to catch his breath, and says, "I'm sorry, instructor, I don't know how to swim." And at that point, the instructor pauses, and he looks at the kid and says, "That's okay, we can teach you how to swim." Right? And the idea is, why did the instructor say that? He said that because he knew if this kid had the qualities, the attributes to show up to Navy SEAL training without knowing how to swim, he had everything inside of him that we needed for him to be a Navy SEAL. Teaching him the skill of swimming was going to be the easy part. And so I always defined the SEALs, and I still do, and it's actually the title of my next book. I define this as masters of uncertainty. We are individuals and teams that can drop into deeply complex environments and begin to perform. And we do
Yeah.
that based on attributes.
Yeah, it reminds me a lot of chess, because that's what separates like top chess grandmasters from those who are not. Is you can drop them into very unfamiliar situations and positions, throw them pieces on the board, and after spending some time looking at it, they can figure out the best path out just because they have intuition, pattern recognition, calculation. They just have
Yeah.
these attributes relevant for chess to be able to look at something they've never seen before and say, okay, I think I can figure out how to get out of this. So
And
it's
they're comfortable. It's
yeah.
so funny you brought that up. One of my good friends is a guy named Josh Waitskin. I'm not sure
Oh
if you
yeah,
know
I know
Josh
Josh.
Waitskin.
Searching
Yeah.
for Bobby Fischer,
Um,
of course.
yeah, searching for Bobby Fischer, and he wrote a book, Art of Learning. But he and I are good friends. We used to, when he was still in the city, we used to have lunch every time I went. But he used to tell me that one of his strategies in chess was to sometimes throw the game into chaos because he knew he was very comfortable in chaos,
Yeah.
and his opponent, he knew he was confident his opponent wasn't as comfortable, and so
Yeah.
that was a very deliberate thing, and part of doing that he had to let go of winning actually because when you throw it into chaos, you don't know what's going to happen. But he just knew he was more comfortable in that environment. So I think you're absolutely right, and chess is a great example, at least certainly in his case.
So let's talk a little bit about these attributes. So it seems like the way that you differentiate it, our skills are the how-to aspect, how to swim, how to shoot a gun, how to run, how to do whatever. Whereas the attributes are more, would you say they're more mindsets, or is a mindset different than an attribute? Or it's like a
Yeah,
quality?
I think it. Yeah, I think it's more of a quality. The way I describe the quick definition would be skills are not inherent to our nature. We're not taught, or we're not born with the ability to ride a bike or throw a ball. They direct our behavior in known specific environments. Here's how and when to throw a ball or ride a bike, and they're very visible, so they're very easy to see and measure and test. Okay. Attributes are inherent to our nature. So, in other words, all of us are born with levels of patience, situation awareness, adaptability. Attributes don't. Now, you can certainly obviously develop those over time and experience, right? But you can see levels of this stuff in small children. So anybody who has small kids or who has been with small kids will agree with me when I say there are 1.5-year-olds who are patient and there are 1.5-year-olds who are impatient. Okay, so there's a nature nurture element to attributes. Attributes don't direct our behavior. Attributes inform our behavior. They tell us how we're going to show up to an environment. So my son's levels of perseverance and resilience informed the way he showed up when he was learning the skill of riding a bike and he was falling off a dozen times doing so. And then finally, they're hard to see, which means they're hard to assess, measure, and test. But they show up the most visibly and viscerally
Mm.
during times of stress, challenge, and uncertainty. So they're driving our behavior at very elemental levels.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. So let's talk a little bit about what the attributes are, and you group them into kind of like these, I guess, these umbrella categories. So you have the themes, and then the attributes below them. But you had grit, mental acuity, drive, leadership, and team ability. Are those the attributes, or are those kind of the categories, and the attributes fall underneath those?
Yeah, those are the categories, and a little bit of a spoiler alert. We're now, since writing the book, we and the work we do with businesses, we now have 9 categories and 41 attributes. In the book, I talk about 25, but the categories are ways that we can actually comfortably bin these attributes. So grit is a great example of this. Grit is a category. A lot of people make the mistake of thinking grit is a singular thing, and they talk about grit as a singular attribute, but in fact, it's not. Grit is a result of a few different things blended and catalyzed and stewed together to create grit. In fact, Angela Duckworth wrote a great book years ago called Grit. She basically said the same thing, right? So the attributes that combine to create the gritty person are courage, adaptability, perseverance, and resilience. Same with mental acuity, same with drive, the attributes that create the driven person, right? So you think about the categories, they just bin. Now, I will say, just because they are in those categories, they're not. Those attributes aren't exclusive to those categories. One could make an argument that courage is a good leadership attribute, right? So
Yeah.
it could go in the leadership category in certain cases, but these just kind of comfortably been in those categories, and it makes it a little bit easier to absorb and understand.
Okay. So I thought maybe we could go through and explain what those categories are, and then maybe we can pick like one attribute from each category if we have time.
Sure.
So let me just add the ones that you said. So we have grit, mental acuity, drive, leadership, team ability. What were the new ones that you added in there since you wrote the book?
Oh gosh, we have social awareness, we have
Okay.
service, we have vision, social awareness, service, vision, and what's I have to look at my list. It'll come to me though. Let me see here.
Well, we can start with those.
Yeah, social intelligence. Oh, commitment is the other one. Yeah. So
Commitment. Okay. Let me write
yeah,
that down here. Okay. So let's go through each one of these, and maybe you can explain what they are and why they're important. And then if we have time, we can pick an attribute from each one. So
yeah,
grit, you kind of touched on. I think a lot of people have an understanding of what grit is. It's the, well, I'll ask you, how do you define it?
yeah. It's really ultimately the capacity to perform through those shorter term, more acute challenges, goals, and endeavors. And the idea is it's they're shorter term, more acute, right? It's those things that you need to power through. That's what grit gets us is allows us to power through those things. So that's how we define grit.
Okay. Mental acuity. What is that?
That is how our brain processes the world around us, right? So it has to do with our brain. The attributes involved in that are situation awareness. How much do we notice about our environment? Compartmentalization, our ability to focus in on something and block out everything else. Task switching, our ability to kind of shift our focus points between different categories and contexts. Learnability, and then discernment, which has to do with kind of our attention to detail.
Okay. And the next we have drive, which a lot of people.
So drive. So if grit speaks to those shorter term goals and challenges and endeavors, the drive speaks to those the capacity to perform through those longer term challenges, goals, and endeavors. So what are the attributes that make up the driven person? In that case, we have 4: self-efficacy, which has to do with this self-starterness. I have the confidence to do it. I have the initiative to get started, and I have the optimism to keep going. Narcissism is one, and we can talk about narcissism as an attribute.
Yeah, when we get to that, that's the one I actually wanted to talk about for sure.
All right, yeah. So let's just hang on that, because the other two are competitiveness and discipline, which are fairly self-explanatory. Narcissism is interesting, and I was looking at this when I was doing the research. I was asking, okay, what are some really powerful human drivers? I was avoiding narcissism for the same reason most people do, because I was thinking narcissistic personality disorder. Okay, but what I did is I got a copy of the DSM-5. I looked up the disorder, and in that text you'll find 9 criteria that if a physician can read those 9 and say yes to 5 or more in terms of the patient, then the patient is considered disordered. Right. So I read through those 9 things, and I'm happy to say I couldn't say yes to 5 or more. However, I was not innocent of everything I was reading. I was like, well, sometimes I do feel like this, sometimes I feel like this, right? So then I kind of backed up and I said, okay, why did I become a Navy SEAL in the first place? Okay, this was in the 90s. There's nothing really going on. 22-year-old kid. Okay, obviously I'm a patriot. I want to serve my country. But one of the biggest reasons was because I wanted to see if I could be a badass. I wanted to see if I could do something very few people could do. Okay. Then I asked my SEAL buddies, why did they become SEALs? And they said the same thing, right? Yeah, they're patriots, but they wanted to see if they could do something very few people could do. So at that point, I looked up the definition of what I call generalized narcissism. Okay, the general kind of simple definition of narcissism is the desire to stand out, be recognized, be adored, be made feel special. Okay, and I can tell you with certainty, and psychologists will agree, every single human being on this planet at some point in their lives wants to stand out, be recognized, be adored, be made feel special at some point, right? So it's a very, very elemental human driver, okay? So narcissism in general terms is this desire to stand out, be special, do something unique, okay? This is the impetus to some very audacious goals, whether it be being a Navy SEAL, being the best podcaster, being a top surgeon, or even being the rebel, wearing stuff that makes you stand out from other people. There's a form there, right? So the idea is we all have elements of this stuff, at least small elements, and they do drive us to some very audacious goals oftentimes, and that's why it's one of the attributes.
Okay. All right. And then we can get back to the narcissism one is fascinating, because everybody always thinks that's a terrible thing. You don't want to be narcissistic. People like Jordan Peterson talk about why narcissism is so bad. Part of his dark triad philosophy that he has.
Yeah.
So we can talk about that too. Next, we have leadership.
Yes, yeah, leadership as a category. First of all, we have to understand when it comes to leadership, being a leader and being in charge are 2 separate things. Okay, one is a position, and being in charge is a position. One is a behavior. Being a leader is a behavior. So in other words, we don't get to self-designate. We don't get to call ourselves leaders. That's like calling yourself good-looking or funny. Okay, other people decide whether or not you are someone they want to lead based on how you behave. And those attributes, those behaviors stem from very basic attributes: authenticity, decisiveness, and accountability. And we know, because we know when we see someone who's accountability, take for example, accountability is this thing is like, I own this. It's an ownership thing, right? And then whenever we see someone who's always pointing fingers and blaming other people, we tend not to look at that person as a leader. Okay, it's just natural. So that's why it's an incredibly important leadership attribute.
All right, next we have team ability.
Yeah, team ability is this idea of how we operate with others in a teaming environment. And I would say, just like leadership, you don't get to call yourself a great teammate. Other people decide whether or not you're a great teammate based on how you behave. And those attributes stem from, those behaviors are integrity, and that's do the right thing, okay, in the context of the group, right? Because do the right thing for one group looks different than do the right thing for another group, okay? Conscientiousness, which is this idea that you show up, you work hard, you're reliable, you're diligent, okay? Humility, that's kind of self-explanatory. Collaboration, also self-explanatory. And then insouciance. Insouciance is really defined as this casual lack of concern for what other people think. And why this is important is because this drives our behavior. Like someone who's high in insouciance, those are typically your iconoclasts. Those people who they march to the beat of their own drummer, they do their own thing, and usually people flock to them, right? They're trendsetters in many cases. If you're lower in insouciance, kind of like me, and a lot of SEALs, you're typically looking around you a lot, and you're modulating your behavior to some extent because you care what other people think, right? In the Navy SEAL case, this is like, I never liked heights, so skydiving was always an issue for me. I didn't like it, okay? But I was always going to jump out of that airplane because I did not want to look bad in front of my teammates, okay? I was going to do it because they were doing it. So my low insouciance was actually a powerful ally for me because it caused me to do things I wouldn't otherwise have done. Now, obviously, we can think about, if you're extreme in any case, there's obviously some blind spots and downfalls there. But where you fall on that just starts to help you understand your own behavior.
Okay. And then the last four, I guess these are the new ones that are not in the book that you've since added. So social awareness, service, vision, and commitment.
Yeah, so let's do commitment. Okay, the capacity to dedicate oneself to a task or outcome, and those attributes are persistence. Okay, a firm obstinance that I'm going to stay the course, and I'm going to make something happen. Tenacity, which is more like if I'm doing something and I counter a problem, I'm going to be able to shift my approach. Right, I'm more able to shift my approach. Confidence, which is self-explanatory. I know I can do this. Optimism, and that's that. Optimism is kind of you're in the optimal optimism. It's a realistic optimism, right? I know as I go through, I'll figure it out. And then patience, and again, patience is one of those ones. If you're high on patience, low on patience, doesn't really matter. It just drives your performance in specific ways, and so that's the commitment one.
And then I'm guessing, so social awareness, probably the EQ. I guess from a high level, we could think about that, right? Social awareness, is that roughly how you would define it?
Yeah, social awareness is exactly that. It's and what we have to understand is social awareness is a combination of things, right? So what combines to make the socially aware person, okay? And the idea would be the attributes that combine in that are your emotional awareness, okay? So how emotional awareness is how cognizant am I of my own emotions and my own emotional control? And can I be cognizant of others' emotions in the room? Can I read the room? Okay. Different than empathy. Empathy is I feel what other people feel. So, emotional awareness is I can read the room, right? You're not necessarily feeling. Okay. Extroversion, which is obviously we have introversion, extroversion. That's really where we get our energy from, okay? So it has nothing to do with your ability to be social. It's just those who are introverted their battery tends to drain when they're in large groups and environments. So it's kind of like me. Okay. My wife is extroverted. She's in those large groups. Her battery fills up. Okay. So, but again, our ability to be social is not necessarily affected by that too much. It can be, but it's not too much.
Okay.
Influence and charisma, same thing. Charisma, this entertainment value, influences. I move people. And then of course, humor. Humor is really important in terms of being able to relate to other human beings. It's a very powerful attribute if you're able to laugh when things are tough.
And then we have service and vision. Service, I'm assuming you just talk about the idea of serving others. I think a lot of people can relate to that. And vision, I think a lot of, again, people can relate to that one as well, is being 100%. Able to kind of paint a picture of what the better future can look like and figure out how to get to that better vision. Would you add anything to those, or is that roughly?
I would just, vision is it has to do with imagination. So you have creativity, innovativeness, cunning, you have open-mindedness, curiosity, and then service is, in what capacity am I able to actually do for others, and you have empathy, compassion, caring, generosity, and selflessness.
People leaders are moving beyond traditional HR to shape the future of work and employee experience at their organizations and for the world at large. The problem is that these leaders don't have the network or the resources to do so effectively. That's where Future of Work Leaders comes in. This is a brand new global community I put together of the world's top people leaders from brands including Neiman Marcus, Johnson & Johnson, Dow, Lego, Northrop Grumman, and dozens of others. If you're interested in learning more and requesting an invite, and if you are a Chief Human or Chief People Officer, then head on over to futureofworkleaders.com. Again, that is futureofworkleaders.com, or you can reach out to me directly, jacob@thefutureorganization.com. All right. So when you think about these attributes, because obviously there's a lot of them in there, 25, and you said now you have what, 41?
41, yeah.
41, okay. So somebody might look at that and say, okay, well, that's a lot of freaking attributes, 41, right? So are you supposed to be amazing at all 41? Do you prioritize
No.
some over the others? Like how can people start thinking about these attributes?
Yes, that's a great question. So no, we're not amazing in all 41. We actually rank in all 41 in a certain order. In other words, we prioritize. We're high in some and we're low in others. And so part of the things that we help with our assessment tools, we help people understand what their ranking attributes are or how their attributes rank. And so depending on what you're high on and depending on what you're low on, that starts to indicate and give you ideas and indicators of your own performance. But the idea is there's no judgment there, okay? In other words, the fact that you're high on these and low on these are in fact exactly why you've been successful in a lot of the things you've been doing. Because I would say the stand-up comic with too much empathy is going to be a lousy stand-up comic, right?
Yeah.
And so but if you're, say, high on decisiveness, okay, and you're low on patience, well, those things kind of serve each other, right? Your low patience allows you to make decisions a little bit faster than someone else. There are obviously sometimes some blind spots, sure, but you want to look at these rankings more in, okay, this is how and why I perform the way I do versus it's a judgment or a verdict on how I am or who I am as a human. The way I describe this real quick, Jacob, to people is I talk about, I say that human beings are like automobiles, okay? But we're all different kinds. Like some of us are Jeeps, some of us are SUVs, some of us are Ferraris. And there's no judgment there because the Jeep can do things the Ferrari can't do and the Ferrari can do things the Jeep can't do. But we want to lift our hood and figure out what kind of car we are. And the attributes allow us to figure out what kind of car we are, and it starts to help speak to our performance in different environments.
Okay, so I guess the way to think about it is you're naturally going to be low in some and high in others, and that's kind of what makes you who you are. So are you supposed to improve on some of these, or are you just supposed to know which ones you're high at and which ones you're low at without having to improve the lows and maintain the highs?
Yeah. It depends. It depends on what you'd like to do. In some cases, those that you are low on can be buttressed by, say, a teammate. Okay. My wife and I, we've been married for 23 years. I'm high on patience. She's low on patience. Okay. That works beautifully for us because when patience is required, I step up, and when impatience is required, she steps up.
Yep.
My patience has prevented her from sometimes making decisions too fast or moving too quickly. Her impatience has prevented me from procrastinating too long or not making a decision fast enough, right? So you can team, but that said, you can also dial up and dial down attributes in certain cases, right? And that's all of our personal choice. There may be case, so someone who, for example, has humor in their top 5, right? Maybe humor is their number 1, okay? They may find there are certain situations they need to deliberately dial down their humor, okay? Because the environment may not require that. It might not be best for that. There are other places where someone's low on patience. They may have to dial up their patience in certain cases, especially if we have kids, okay? A lot of times when you have kids, you have to dial up your patience if you're an impatient person. So it's really the knowledge of this allows you to start making better decisions as to A, teaming, and then B, what you want to deliberately dial up and dial down in certain cases.
Okay, that makes sense. So I guess there are a couple of ways to approach this. One is just as an individual contributor yourself, how you should be thinking about these attributes. Which ones should you be focusing on if you want to succeed at your company? And another approach, I guess, could be if you're a leader, and how do you identify these attributes? How do you observe these attributes, not just in yourself, but also in others? So can you walk me through how, so now I guess we have a high level understanding of what these categories are, and people can read the book to learn about all the attributes. But then the question is kind of like, so what? So let's say I'm an individual employee, I'm at a company, I know the attributes. What am I supposed to do with this information as an individual contributor?
Yeah, well, so it's all about performance, and what I will say is that when having lived with, worked with, led the top performers on the planet, and just truly understanding the intricacies of high-performing humans and high-performing teams, what I will say is the definition of a high-performing team or a high-performing human is someone or a group of people that perform not only when things are going great, but also when things are not going great. When the plan goes sideways, when the you-know-what hits the fan. This is when the high performers step up, and this is when the high-performing teams step up. So why does that matter? It's because if we want to understand how we perform at very elemental levels, we need to understand our attributes. And by understanding your own attributes, you start to get the superpower, I call it, of understanding exactly how and why you'll perform the way you do when you are at your most raw. Okay. And this is a gift. It really is. It's a gift I got at SEAL training. It's a gift all my buddies got. We understood ourselves at our most raw, which
Okay.
means we know exactly how we're going to show up when things hit the fan. Now, when it comes to teaming, it becomes even more important, because if you understand, and you, as a leader, you encourage your team to understand each other at those levels. This is exactly why Navy SEALs can do the things they do, is because we understand exactly how we're showing up. We wear our strengths and our weaknesses all on our sleeves. So my teammates know exactly when they're going to be leaning on me, and they know exactly when I'm going to be leaning on them. And we know how we're going to operate at our most raw when we're in teaming. So the idea is, it gives you a language of performance that is extremely deep and elemental, and it provides you a language of performance that is in fact English language, right? In other words, I say, by the way, I've taken a ton of personality tests, and I actually like most of them. I think there are some phenomenal ones out there. The only complaint I have with some of them is that when you get your results, you're given a couple colors or a couple numbers or some letters, right? And if you're not talking to someone who knows what those letters or those colors or those numbers mean, it's Greek to them, okay, right? So what the attributes language allows you to do is talk about performance with language that everybody understands. People know what adaptability is. People know what situation awareness is. People know what creativity is, right? So it gives you a language for performance that's universal and allows you to talk about it at very elemental levels.
Okay. And now let's look at this from a leadership perspective. So I'm a leader of a team, a function, maybe even a company. How should I be thinking about these attributes in terms of my team, putting a team together, spotting these attributes in other people? What do I do with that?
Yeah. Couple ways. First, we need to think, as a leader, you need to be thinking about why and how your team operates the way it does. Okay, to do that, you need to understand your attributes and the attributes of your teammates, and the team needs to understand everybody else's attributes. Now you can start to identify how and why people show up the way they show up. That's going to allow a leader to do a couple things. It's going to allow him, first of all, him or her, to optimize performance, because now people know what they're doing, and also it allows people, a leader, to shift people inside of a team or organization. In other words, sometimes you may be looking at something that looks like low performance, but it's not because the person is bad or incapable. It's because they're being asked to do something that doesn't necessarily match their attribute list, right?
Okay.
That happened to me a couple times in a leadership role. All I had to do was shift someone over to a different position, their performance skyrocketed. So it allows you to optimize your own team, and then it also allows you to understand the gaps you might have in your team and hire or bring people on the team specifically for those gaps. So in other words, I'm not now looking for, I need someone who can do this thing. No, actually, I need more patience in this team. I need someone who's more patient, or I need more adaptability, or you name it. You name the attribute, whatever you need, but it allows leaders a very holistic picture on performance with the current team, optimizing that, and then bringing in exactly what they need and having people fit first time, the right time, every time.
Okay. Can you have too much of any of these attributes? Like, how do you know what the right balance is? For example,
Yes.
narcissism was one of the attributes that we talked about earlier. It seems like a certain amount of that is good, but having too much of that is bad. So how do you balance these different attributes with each other?
Yeah, it's again, we're all going to be high on some, low on the other. Extremes in any case can often tilt towards bad things, and you pick the attribute, name the attribute. If it's extreme high or extreme low, there's probably going to be a few more blind spots that you're going to have to be aware of. Narcissism is the obvious one, right? But even something like adaptability. If you're too high on adaptability, that means you might just be a limp noodle. I mean, there's no rigidity in your ability to kind of stay the course, right? And so, and if you're too low on adaptability, extreme, that means you're the pole that's not moving. I mean, there's zero flexibility, right? So you can see how you pick any attribute, you can start seeing how extremes at any level has the potential of producing maybe some bad results. Luckily, very few of us are extreme in any of these things, right? We're just highs and lows. But if we are extreme, either in ourselves or in our teammates, we can start to identify that and do something about it.
Yeah, that's always interesting, is figuring out the kind of the ups and downs and how much of one thing that you need and how much of the other you don't need. Is that a challenge, you think, for a lot of leaders? Or when you look at these attributes, are there certain of them that are harder for people to embrace and practice and learn versus others? Like, I would imagine I don't know, the grit, for example, that comes up a lot. I talk to a lot of CHROs, and specifically when they think about Gen Z, the conversation of lack of grit comes up a lot.
Yeah.
The lack of social awareness comes up a lot. So are there certain attributes that are, I don't know, easier to embrace versus
Easier
others?
to. Yeah, I would be careful in saying that there were certainly some. I would be careful being definitive about that because it's very subjective to the individual, right?
Yeah.
However, I could make a good case for some of these being a little bit harder to dial up and dial down, right? Charisma is a great example of this.
Oh,
Charisma,
yeah.
it's very hard for someone who has low charisma to dial up charisma. I mean, how do you do that? That might be a difficult thing to do. Courage, on the other hand, is even though it's painful, it's not as hard as people think because courage is just about stepping outside your comfort zone. So you can dial up your courage just by doing more things that make you uncomfortable. That could be as easy as just
Yeah.
starting up a conversation that you otherwise wouldn't start up, or taking a new route to school or work that you otherwise wouldn't have done. Right, something that makes you a little bit more uncomfortable. So I think depending on the attributes, you can certainly dial up, dial down those. There are probably a few that are a little bit more difficult, but that might be my own bias. I mean, someone might find it easy to dial up their charisma. Who knows?
Yeah. It's interesting that you mentioned charisma. I'm watching a documentary on Netflix about Vince McMahon that just came out.
Yeah,
You know Vince McMahon,
yeah.
the
I know.
WWE?
In fact, I saw that. I saw that advertised on Netflix. I haven't watched it yet, but
Yeah,
I
so
saw it.
it's really good, but he talks about one of the wrestlers, I think from the 90s, Lex Luger. And he talked about how they were trying to create, after Hulk Hogan, they needed another star to fill his shoes because Hulkamania, it was kind of dying down. They needed somebody else to replace him. And so they tried to replace him with this wrestler named Lex Luger. And he mentioned that the challenge with Lex is that he had a lot of the attributes, but charisma was one that they just couldn't get
Yeah.
him to embody. And to your point, they couldn't
Yes.
teach charisma. And he was like okay at it. He was good in a lot of areas, but it was because of that charisma that he didn't have that they couldn't turn him into this Hulk Hogan like star. So it's interesting
Right.
that you
Right.
mentioned that. It just kind of popped into my mind there.
Yeah,
Um,
it's true. It's a tough one, and it's really that entertainment factor. That's what charisma is. You just want
yeah.
someone with high on charisma is the people you love to watch, right? And again, you can when you look at these attributes in tandem, you can have high charisma, low influence, right? That's someone who you love to watch, are very entertaining, but they're not going to move you to do much, right? Whereas you can have someone who's very high on influence and low on charisma. And some of us, I'm sure you know these people. I know I've known a couple who just they have almost zero charisma, but man, when they speak or when they talk, you move, right? You
Yeah.
do what they say. They're highly influential, right? So these attributes can show up in very interesting and distinct ways that really start to identify performance in distinct ways.
Are there any downsides or dark sides of these attributes?
Well, I would say yes. In terms of the extremes, obviously we know. I mean, the extreme narcissism is there's a dark side there. Extreme. Well, listen, extreme courage that could be a dark side. That
Yeah.
could be the bulldog approach where you're always running into the stuff. You're almost driven by it because you do, by the way, get a dopamine reward when you step into your fear, and so those folks who just they can't get enough of it, right? So
Yep.
I think whenever we encourage people to look at their attributes, we encourage them to explore their unique set and ask themselves, okay, when you look at your unique set of attributes, how has this set served you? And how has this set not served you, right?
Yeah.
And then it allows for a level of introspection that says, okay, I can see why and how I am the way I am and see why I'm very successful, but I can also see some blind spots, some dark sides to this that I need to be aware of. So I think it's just that self-introspection that allows for that level of awareness.
If you were to look at kind of today's business climate, right? There's a lot of uncertainty. I mean, there's always a lot of uncertainty, but it feels like in today's world, it's a little bit more. We have upcoming elections. People are talking about AI and ChatGPT. We have geopolitical issues. There's a lot of polarization. There's just a lot of like crazy stuff happening. If you were to look at your attributes or these categories, especially in times of uncertainty, are there any that you think are particularly more relevant and important in this kind of an uncertain time? And I ask because there's
Yes.
this great book. I don't know if you've read it. I think it was from the 80s or 90s called Barbarians to Bureaucrats. And the
Okay.
author talks about depending at the stage that the company is in, you need a different type of a leader. So sometimes you need a
Yes.
barbarian that comes in there with like a battle axe and just tears things down. And sometimes you need a bureaucrat. Sometimes you need a synergizer. Sometimes you need a politician. Different types of leaders for different types of times.
Yeah.
So same thing for attributes. Looking at today's world, what are the most important attributes?
Well, yeah. So it'll depend on domain, but I won't leave you hanging. In fact, like I said, my second book, which is it's going to print this week actually, it's called Masters of Uncertainty, and I talk specifically about what it takes to become a master of uncertainty, both as individuals and teams. And there's several things in there, but I won't dodge the question. The one most important thing, and it's an attribute, is the ability to compartmentalize. And by compartmentalize, I mean one of the techniques that those of us who are very comfortable in uncertainty use is this idea that we pick and we move our horizons. It's called moving horizons. What happens is we understand in an environment of uncertainty, we will ask ourselves, first of all, we'll control our autonomic arousal so we can actually keep our decision-making frontal lobe online. And we will ask ourselves, okay, what do I know and what can I control in this moment? And we'll pick something. And we'll move to that and we'll block out everything else. And as soon as we move to that, we accomplish that, we get a dopamine reward that allows us to come back out and ask the question again. Okay, what's now? What horizon am I going to pick now? What am I going to move to? And this is taking advantage of a very unique but predominant neurological pathway in our brain that is answering questions about an environment in a very meaningful way. So compartmentalization is literally this ability to just move horizons. It's the neurological equivalent of chunking your environment or eating the elephant one bite at a time. And that's one of the most important tools and techniques, and I would say attributes, to be able to move through uncertainty, challenge, and stress.
Okay, perfect. So I wanted to spend the last 10, 15 minutes or so talking about how to develop some of these attributes. So maybe you could pick your top, I don't know, your favorite 3 to 5, and we can go over some specific tips that people might be able to implement on how to develop these attributes. My conversation with Rich continues only for premium subscribers of Future Ready Leadership Plus on Apple Podcasts. And if you subscribe, then you'll get access not only to ad-free listening, but to this bonus episode with Rich, where we talk about how to develop some of these attributes. He's going to give a couple strategies that you can use, that you can implement in your personal life and in your career to become a more successful and a better leader. And remember, you get access to one of these episodes every single week when you subscribe on Apple Podcasts. I believe it's only $4.99 a month. You can also sign up for the full year and get an even bigger discount that way. It's pretty much free, let's put it that way. So make sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts. And then if you want to get access to the newsletter, go to thefutureorganization.com/newsletter. And if you enjoyed this show, please share it with somebody who you would like to see become a better leader. See you next time.